Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 11 o'clock. It's our start time now. My name is Theodora Mudise. I'm the events coordinator for the library at the University of Johannesburg. And I welcome you all and appreciate the fact that you've taken your time to come and listen to this discussion. I'm now going to introduce Prof Suzy Graham to you. Professor Suzy Graham is an associate professor and head of department, politics and international relations at the University of Johannesburg. She's also co-president of RISC-RISE, Consortium for Regional Integration and Social Cohesion, Social Elevation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Suzy Graham. I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Theo. I appreciate the warm welcome, and thank you for asking me to participate in this library series during this crisis. I'd like to say hello to everybody who's joined and to wish everybody well, and to explain why I wanted to talk with you all about political leadership during this time. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine after President Ramaphosa's first speech, national speech about the crisis and South Africa's response to the crisis in our country. And we'd talked for a while, and then we were briefly talking about the speech. My colleague here I'm referring to is Prof Chris Landsberg, who's the chair, SACHI chair in African diplomacy and foreign policy. And we both remarked on how presidential President Ramaphosa seemed to be. And we were both struck by that because by implication, we both felt that he hadn't been presidential before that point, despite being president since 2018. So trying to consider what is it now that suddenly elevated him to this role of conveying a truly presidential character under the circumstances. And it made me think, I really want to talk about political leadership, and hopefully other people want to discuss it with me too. And so I was trying to investigate, because it's not a particular area of expertise of mine, what political leadership means. And I was finding all these different sources about what it should be in different countries, in different situations. And so political leadership theoretically is supposed to be a symbolic activity. It's mediated by culture, and leaders are understood to be engaged in providing visions for a country and for the people of a country, to create, shape, and enhance national and other political cultures. So that's just a little bit of definition work to start off with. And especially in developing countries, the role of leadership is supposed to be to enable development or to progress and advance society. Now, those are very, very big tasks for any leader to try and make happen. But especially in South Africa, which is such a combination of economies and peoples and histories, all combined in a very kind of small space. So the other thing is that effective leadership, because really anybody can try to be a leader, but effective leadership stems from setting a positive example. So the idea is here, if you want to be a good leader, just on a day-to-day basis, in any role you're in, never mind being the president, then you need to be able to have a positive example and sustain that behavior, that positive behavior for other people, so you become a kind of role model for other people generally. And you hope that they hope they can live up to your behavior, your standards of behavior. So the idea is you hope to inspire a shared vision. You hope to motivate and enable other people to try and inspire different teams to cooperate with each other, even if they might be extremely diverse and opposing each other in every possible respect. So it's your job, if you're an effective leader, to try and make sure that cooperation still emerges from this diverse group of people. And you're trying to come up with some kind of defined goal which you set that everybody can buy into. And through compromise and negotiation and bargaining techniques, you're able to, and through your own charisma as a person, create a solution everybody can be happy with. So in most countries, obviously, the executive political leader, whether it's a president or a prime minister, marks a natural focal point of political attention. So political leaders have to create goals for the country, like I said, and they're also seen, therefore, as agents of change, which is a phrase that's often bandied about. If you're students of politics, you've heard of this often, agents of change, and many people can be agents of change, not necessarily executive leaders, but anybody in society, including activists from the grassroots level upwards. But the leader of a country is in a position to affect real change in a widespread way nationally because of the position he or she is in and the powers they are afforded in their roles. So it's very difficult trying to understand why leaders act and make the decisions they do. It's very complex and it's very interesting, obviously. That's why I want to talk with you about this today, because political leaders are going to make their decisions for the public, especially in a representative democracy like ours, where we vote our president into power, and he is supposed to protect all of the citizens' rights within the country. It doesn't matter which political party you belong to. If he's president, he's responsible for all South African citizens and their well-being. So leaders act the way they do, and it's based on their emotional intelligence. It's based on their political skill. It's based on their morals and beliefs, their level of confidence, and even the circumstances in which they've come to find themselves. So this is the crux, because individuals are obviously even more important as leaders during times of crisis and uncertainty. And in summary, quickly, before we go on to the discussion about President Ramaphosa, the role of the executive is really that this person, whoever it is the personal embodiment of the state's power and authority. So this means that naturally, the functions of this executive, this leader, would be many. They have to provide political leadership overall, but political leadership can be many different things and embrace many different things. You might have to have ceremonial leadership. You might have to have policy-making leadership, or popular leadership, or bureaucratic leadership. There are many different other types of leadership. Laissez-faire leadership, when you leave everything to other people and hope everything just runs smoothly on its own. Democratic leadership, you have transformational leadership, transactional leadership. There's a whole bunch of things, but the thing that we should care about at the moment is crisis leadership. So crisis leadership is the ability to make decisions quickly when a crisis breaks out in either a domestic or international political situation. And so obviously it's the executive that has to respond. And in that situation, if it's very drastic or dire, it would be common for an executive to seize emergency powers or declare a national disaster or a state of emergency or something like that in order to try and effectively control the situation. And the well-meaning intent behind that should ultimately be to protect the citizens of the country. Of course, that's not always the case. Historically speaking, people have seized power and manipulated the power for their own selfish interests. That's true. But we're going to talk about this current situation during COVID-19 and see what we can figure out about it. It's also true that when powers are seized during crisis situations by a political leader, they might abuse that power. They might try to weaken political opposition, or they might try and boost their own portfolios instead of really dealing with the situation at hand. There's this very interesting concept that I'd never heard of before, that I came across in reading when preparing for this talk, and that's called mentalizer's paradox. So, it's all about mental thinking. So a mentalizer is somebody who thinks about how other people think. So thinking about, if you're a good leader, for example, you should automatically think about other people. Because if you want to lead, you're there for a reason, presumably, and that must be to try and make life better for other people. So you're thinking about their circumstances and their challenges and the situations they're in, and you're trying to make their lives better. This is if you're a political leader of a country. But the mentalizer's paradox is really thinking about how other people think, which is a very different thing. It's very different to just think about other people and their situations. That's very different from thinking about how other people think about their situations. because you're effectively trying to become that person, step into their shoes, feel what they feel, empathize, and really understand what they're thinking and where they're coming from. So the idea is thinking about other people's thinking is critical for the kind of leadership that addresses complex problems like pandemics, which is what this world's facing at the moment. And the paradox is, what studies have found is that the higher you go up in a hierarchy, so some people might refer to elite governments or situations where you have somebody with absolute authority at the top and then it fizzles down the ladder. The higher up you rise in a hierarchy, the less likely you are able to mentalize. That is, the less likely you're able to think about how other people think about their situations, and your ability to lead starts to atrophy, to quote directly from the source. So basically, your ability to lead would therefore weaken or stagnate or break down, essentially. And ultimately, a great leader is somebody who establishes many opportunities for empathetic practice to show how looking out for each other can actually make life better for everybody on a day-to-day basis. So I was hoping to be able to share, I don't know if I'm going to be able to share something here. It says it's disabled, the screen sharing. So I was hoping to be able to share a PowerPoint picture with you just to help get you thinking about things. So I'm going to instead ask you to visualize this scenario. And that is simply this. Visualize President Ramaphosa. Lately, he's taken to wearing a South African scarf around his neck whenever he takes to the podium, always looking very smart, very dapper, very composed behind a microphone. So I hope you're all able to visualize President Ramaphosa in front of you right now. And then I want you to visualize next to President Ramaphosa, President Donald Trump. That's the US president. And I just want you to put those two mental pictures together. Now, some of you might not follow US President Donald Trump. Some of you might follow him just to basically laugh at what he tends to do on a daily basis because he's so controversial as a leader. But if you see those two people next to each other and you think to yourself, they're both presidents of a country, they both have savvy business pasts, they both are able to negotiate deals and have excellent skills in doing so. And so they're able to deal with many different types of people because of their natural backgrounds. There's a Ugandan proverb that suggests that rulers are like hills. That means that when darkness falls, they all speak alike. So I thought, is that true if we take the example of President Ramaphosa and President Trump during the COVID-19 crisis? Because if you have a look at their speeches, which you might have had a chance to view, just looking at the news naturally as interested people in the subject, you'll see that they have very similar language. And in fact, many leaders across the world have used very similar terms in their speeches. You'll often find people trying to indicate in their speeches unity, solidarity, a sense of compassion for fellow human beings. Let's stick this out together, we will prevail. All that kind of language is very symbolic language. And you expect a president to use that kind of language because you want the charisma to follow through in the text that he's using to speak through or she's speaking through. And it motivates you. And it gets you inspired. It gets you to rally, which is during a crisis, what you hope is the reaction of the population, that they all believe sincerely in what you have to say, that they believe that what you're saying is factual, is true, and is the right recourse in that moment. And in fact, if you're the leader of a country, the people of the country really expect you to look out for them. And this is something that would naturally come to you as a political leader, hopefully, is the assumption. So when we look at President Ramaphosa and his three main national speeches, the 23rd of March speech, and then 9th of April speech, and then last week's speech, when you saw a natural progression in how he elevated the crisis status of the country in relation to COVID-19. You'll see in all his speeches the type of language he uses, and he always starts off with "my fellow South Africans," which is a really wonderful way to make everybody feel they're part of this, that they're unified, and that the president feels he is not isolated or separate from you, but part of you, and wanting to resolve this crisis with you and for you. It's very important terminology. But then again, President Donald Trump says exactly the same thing, my fellow Americans. So there's no real difference there. But often people would associate President Trump with negative connotations, that he's a selfish president, that he's a racist president, that he's a sexist president, all of these different generalizations about him because of what he said in the past and different controversies around him. And yet they use the same language. You'll also see President Ramaphosa using fantastic language, asking the South African population to abide by the lockdown rules. So not saying, you must do this, otherwise everybody will die. He's never really been a drama queen, President Ramaphosa, even before he was president. He doesn't take to that kind of style. He's not a drama queen. He's more like Obama, President Obama, former president of America, when it comes to reacting to situations. He's more measured and considered in his response. And we've still seen that now. But the different types of language that he would use, he salutes you as the South African people. I salute you. I thank you. So he acknowledges the South African people in his speeches. So whether or not you might agree with severe lockdown measures like not being able to buy alcohol or cigarettes, which is also a very controversial thing, the key for me is how has he gone about his speeches? What kind of message is he conveying in his speeches? How does he approach the podium? Okay, often he's been late to the podium, that's true. But when he's got there, he's had a very measured, considered speech, thought through speech. He's indicated that he's consulted with his cabinet and with the premier. So he's got an inclusive style of leadership there. He talks about how important, so he doesn't try to sugarcoat anything. He explains the situation and how it will have negative consequences for everybody, but how important it is that we have the courage and above all the compassion to get through this and that we will prevail. He also talks about may God protect the people. So he's bringing in a religious element there and, attracting another portion of the population that might be extremely religious. So if we look at a few others, the other two speeches, he talks about how South African people have suffered. So this is now midway through the lockdown on his 9th of April speech, and he's talking about we have suffered as a people. He realizes this. There's a need, though, for an escalation, which is when he created the lockdown, etc. And then last week, he also indicates once again how much the South African people have suffered. He's aware of this. He acknowledges this. He says, thank you again for respecting the lockdown. Thank you for reaffirming for each other and the world that the South African people can come together and unite in moments of great crisis. This is our natural, it's in our DNA, basically, he's trying to say. So all of these types of languages, these terms used that are repeated throughout the speeches are obviously very symbolic, like I said before, and they're there for a reason. He's trying to convey a very specific thing. This is an important situation. People are dying in our country. It's not as much yet as the rest of the world. And the point is we don't want it to reach those levels. So this is what we need to do to ensure that doesn't happen. Please follow the rules. I know it's a hardship and that there will be crises, that are actually consequential, that are as a result of the measures he's put in place. And he's aware of those, but that these are the best things to do based on his advice from cabinet members and from scientific advisors. And this is what we need to do going forward. So he's not pussyfooting about the issue. He's not trying to sugarcoat the issue, in my view. What he's trying to do is just state it. He gives people step-by-step instructions. This is what's going to happen. 1, 2, 3. This is how you can get support. Please contribute to a solidarity fund. These are the people making the decisions for us all the time, blah, blah, blah. So he lists for people. He keeps people informed, which is what I, as a citizen of the country, would expect of my leader, my president. And again, he thanks everybody. He says, we shall prevail. May God bless everybody and protect the South African people. If you look at President Trump and what he has to say, you'll see he says very similar things. May God bless America and may God bless the American people. But in contrast, he uses very aggressive language. He says how the European Union has failed. The European Commission has failed. It hasn't done a good job. He talks about the World Health Organization failing in its mandate. It's very negative, the language used. And for me, as somebody listening to those speeches, I know that I'd feel much better listening to President Ramaphosa than I would listening to President Trump. And it's not necessarily that President Trump is just a very straightforward person. I think that as a president of a country, you have to consider all the feelings of the people watching you in that moment. And that essentially what you need to do is make sure you're accommodating those people and speaking to them and realizing and acknowledging how they think about the situation. We've also heard about President Trump, how he wants to put his signature lately on some checks that are going out to people in a people protection plan. And people are suggesting he's obviously using that as a ploy at the moment in order to get re-elected, because he wants to convey the idea that he's on people's side and giving them money, and they might respond to that and vote for him later on in the year, vote him back into power. So that's just a perspective people might have. But it's a very negative view of a president who's trying to use a situation for his own advantage. Now, President Ramaphosa might be doing the same. He isn't, though, in my opinion, using language in speeches and in the decisions taken reflecting that reality for me. And in politics, we know, as Ambassador Wheeler, a former South African ambassador, said, politics is all about perception. So, you know, you have to be very careful as a political leader how you portray yourself and what you say all the time. And because, especially if you're the figurehead of a country and you're the one that everybody looks to for inspiration and hope and guidance. And so President Trump and President Ramaphosa have very different styles. And President Trump, just to follow on from that, uses terms like, I've spoken with our allies. We are marshalling resolve. He's talking about our response as a government has been very speedy and professional. There's a lot of self-focus there. And that's not really something that would inspire confidence in me. It seems more like political aggrandizing or something like that, or making the most of the situation for your own government's goodwill or benefit at the end of the day, goodwill that the citizens might have towards your government. Then I just wanted to say another thing. There were responses that I looked at from people who responded to President Ramaphosa, just ordinary citizens responding to speeches that were posted online. And one person said, well done, President Ramaphosa, very strong, very clear, very compassionate leadership. Tough decisions made, but for the good of the people. That's what I see. That's my president. And there was a definite sense that people felt good about the speeches that were made. Versus other perspectives where people said, this is just a typical mass narrative, which is taking hold of the major decision makers around the world, and nobody's really saying anything different. And we as South Africans have much greater problems in the country, HIV infection rates, economic problems that have been ongoing throughout the apartheid years and post-apartheid, and that these are greater problems than the problem we're currently experiencing. So there'll always be people who criticize presidents and may have very valid points as well. So the point is, what does the president do in response? Acknowledges the different points of views, but still lays down the law, because that's what he and his advisors believe is ultimately the best plan of action for the country. Now, just one final point before I think we can try and open up for discussion, and that is that President Ramaphosa as a person has never really had an excellent kind of reputation. He's really kind of been seen as somebody who is very delayed in terms of taking action, very indecisive. And some people would say euphemistically that that just means he's very inclusive and wants to get a lot of people's opinions about something. But I think that's actually an unfair statement to make for those people who believe that a president should take action and show that he or she is presidential. President Ramaphosa, before this pandemic happened, was often seen as being very cautious, and that this cautious nature would undermine his credibility as a political leader, and that this would run the risk of making him seem even culpable or complicit in the former presidency's term, in that he didn't take very decisive action, and he always seemed to delay things and want to talk about things and talk through things in relation to the state and then the ANC as an actual party, separate from the state government. He also, had to take on quite a heavy mantle when he became president, because he had to restore credibility to the presidency and to the state machinery overall, which is obviously not a very easy thing to do, as many leaders, experts on leadership in South Africa have already stated multiple times. So people don't have a very glowing reputation of President Ramaphosa before this COVID-19 outbreak, because they thought he wasn't decisive enough and that he was just wanting too many different opinions, and that was delaying things, and that it didn't inspire a lot of confidence as a result. But in my view, since this pandemic has happened and has affected South African shores, he's certainly demonstrated decisiveness. He's acted far more quickly than other leaders around the world have acted at the start of their own pandemics. And even though people might still wish to criticize him, in my view, he's acted decisively. And his speeches, very importantly, have inspired confidence in me, just as a citizen of South Africa, but also as somebody interested in politics and international relations, so that I can compare him with him and what he has to say with other leaders around the world. And so he's been decisive, he's set a plan of action, he's repeated that plan of action. The language he's used has been really quite interesting and very motivational. And he's tried to use his same style of inclusivity by drawing on my fellow South Africans. We will get through this, we will prevail. And so, in my view, he's actually scoring high on a scorecard of political leadership during the COVID-19 crisis. Okay, I hope I didn't speak too quickly there. I have a habit of speaking too quickly, but I hope we can now open up to questions and have a discussion about it.
Divides them between the reformers and the traditionalists. And I was just wondering, given what you've just said, how you would view the current debate on whether or not to get aid from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and how the debate could play out given the current leadership debate that's going on.
Whether or not to get aid is a good
Yes.
thing or bad thing, you mean?
Well, look, the ANC is divided down the middle. You've got the one half, the traditionalists that are saying no way in hell, and then you've got the reformers that are saying yes, please go for it. And I just wonder how, you know, Ramaphosa's sort of euphoria style of leadership, if I can call it that, can, you know, will influence that decision.
I think that ultimately any decision that's made would have to be taken as, in his style of leadership, as an inclusive decision within the ANC leadership in its own form as a party. But he would also, as the president of the country, have to consider how any aid from the International Monetary Fund or World Bank would ultimately assist South Africa if it did not come with the same conditions that you would have expected from the 1980s World Bank and IMF programs. And he is a savvy businessman. Despite being president now, he's got all of that history behind him. And he knows what needs to be done to try and resolve the country's economic crises. And I think that at the end of the day, he'll try and balance out and neutralize any political fall out as there is between reformers and traditionalists, and neutralize that situation and try and see what the best response would be for the country and to boost the economy after this crisis has ended. And I'm not sure how that will go on for.
Thank you.
Okay, Sven Botha's hand is up. Sven, you can go on.
No, I've just gone, so I'll lower it again.
Thanks, Sven.
Thanks, Suzy.
Okay, we'll allow more questions. Anybody who would like to come in? More questions?
Yes. I saw Zimkita, one of my students from politics. I think he joined. I don't know, Zimkita, if you're still online, but I would love, hi Zimkita, I'd love to hear your views as well, because I know you're working on different types of democratic parties in different countries. And I would love to know your views on how you perceive President Ramaphosa's leadership during this time.
Well, I wanted to actually ask your view on President Ramaphosa's leadership in terms of being the president and as well as being the chairperson of the UN. Like, is there a difference in his approach, and has he affected maybe the continent as much as he has in the country? Because we've seen his role in the country as being very sort of like a mediator who's consultative and inclusive. So has his role been the same in terms of the African Union as the chairperson?
Okay, thanks, Mkita. That's really quite an interesting question, because if you think about it, whenever a president of a country represents South Africa at an event or in a commission or at a conference or a meeting outside of that country, he's basically speaking for all South Africans when he's doing that. And he's expecting all South Africans to be on the same page with him as he conveys a unified message. And that's always been, as we know from students of politics, that Africa first and the betterment of Africa, a better Africa and a better world. This is a phrase that the government's continuously using. And I thought it was so interesting during the COVID-19 outbreak that South Africa was quite instrumental as a member of SADC to actually get together with health ministers and discuss a regional response and reviving a SADC technical committee, and how that technical committee would be able to use medical equipment and get the medical equipment that was necessary to various countries when they needed it. So I thought that was quite an interesting point. And then, of course, because Africa is so instrumental in the AU this year, it's absolutely fundamental that President Ramaphosa be seen to be an effective leader at the AU and of the AU at the moment. And I think he's also tried to do that. You'll see in his last speech that he indicated that he'd met with other AU leaders and that they'd all discussed the many challenges that their countries had faced and the commonalities in those challenges and the differences in those challenges, and how they'd all pledged to support each other. My concern a little bit there, though, if I'm speaking from a devil's advocate point of view, is that it's very nice to talk like that. It's, again, as a leader, you want to hear those kinds of things, especially drawing the AU members together and unifying them as a common people, despite all the differences in ethnicities and languages, etc., drawing them all together in a common response to a common enemy, which is this disease. It still makes me worry a little bit that how is that going to actually roll out ultimately? Because at the end of the day, President Ramaphosa is our president and has to respond to the South African needs, but also convey leadership in a regional level or continental level at the AU. And incidentally, as also a member of the G20, only African state to be a member of the G20, he also has a role to play in representing Africa's interests there. So in that platform. So I think that so far I'm happy that he's engaged with SADC, and I'm happy that he's engaged with the AU, but in a sense he had to. He didn't really have an opportunity not to engage. It was expected.
Yes.
So the idea is how interesting it would be for me, I don't know if you agree, Zim, but how interesting it would be for me if this pandemic had never reached South Africa's shores. Would we see a presidential Ramaphosa? I'm not talking about the president, but a presidential, conveying the characteristic of being a presidential president. Would we see that now? And I'm not so sure we would. I think that the fact that it reached South Africa elevated him, it boosted him into this position, into this role, which he's ultimately demonstrating, to me at least, that he is capable of doing and achieving in this way, which is a very interesting thing.
Can I say something on that, Prof?
Yes, please, go ahead. That's
Jean Grinling, yes.
Thank you.
So this was so interesting, and I totally agree with your views on President Ramaphosa. And I feel exactly the way, what you said about him now, that this crisis almost gave him the opportunity to demonstrate his real leadership. And the different factions in the ANC almost didn't allow him to do so. That's my perspective. What are the chances that he will go back to his earlier style after the crisis due to the issues and the dynamics in the ANC?
This is, thanks, Jean. Actually, this is a very, very important point, because we've seen in the past other types of crises, not at this level, but let's think about Marikana and other problems that this country's witnessed and what the different presidents have done in these different times. And it does make you think, oh, well, it'll be more of the same once all of this goes by, because people forget. You know, I know it's a dire situation now, but, you know, once this is over and there's a vaccine and people don't die from this anymore, people will forget. And that means that political leaders might slip into habits that have been formed and back into previous challenges that they were facing before the crisis. I think, in my view, with President Ramaphosa, this whole experience might have given him a lift in terms of personal confidence, that he can ultimately make decisions and convey them in front of a public that responds relatively well to those decisions. And it's the boost I think he needed, absolutely. And I'm hopeful that he will be able to utilize that public goodwill now in his favor for the most part, as a kind of negotiating, bargaining tool when it comes back to the factionalism within the ANC, because he would have that element that has elevated him. And I would think he would be able to use that, and hope he would be able to use that for many, many, many months to come. Of course, he will have to deal with the fallout, the social, the economic, and who knows, political fallout when this crisis is eventually over. And that could be very, very long indeed. So he might be it might be a bumpy ride. I mean, we've seen how it's been a bumpy ride for Boris Johnson in the UK, up and down, being criticized and then got sick himself. So we just hope that the president stays well, stays healthy, stays confident, and stays decisive, and is always thinking about how the South African people are thinking. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I just, as a disclaimer, I kind of came into the meeting late. So, you know, I'm kind of picking up here and there. I think perhaps as a comment which may lead to maybe you answering it is the thing about President Ramaphosa is that he has demonstrated, like you said in the past, that he hasn't been decisive. This has been an opportunity for him to elevate his reputation. But given the fact that, as we know, trend is your friend, it's most likely that he's going to revert to his previous actions. And given the fact that we are likely about to go into a deep recession, we find ourselves in a situation as employees, as the general population, that we don't have the leadership required in order to take us through to the next level. Now, I think the other part is we have to give a bit of leeway to chance, as has been demonstrated in the fact that he's managed to come up in terms of leadership in the COVID crisis. But like I said, what is most scary to me is how he's going to lead going into the recession that we may experience.
It's a very valid point, and thanks for raising it. It's true because, like I said before, he's able to now take this platform because, you know, this is new to our country. It's unprecedented worldwide. And so everybody's kind of reeling back and thinking, what do we do? What do we do? And so he's offering at the moment a decisive way forward. Of course, ultimately, people are going to start really seriously seeing consequences as a result of the lockdown that's been instituted. And even now we've seen opposition parties trying to come up with different types of lockdowns, smart lockdowns and other ideas, to try and make a way forward, because it's the role of opposition parties to offer different points of view. But I think that I'm again hopeful that he won't revert to his prolonged action stance that he always used to have before this crisis happened. And I'm hopeful that his skills as a businessman will help him to remember how businesses are thinking about their long-term futures and how the economy needs to be boosted in whatever way is possible, even if it's a short-term boost, and then ultimately a long-term method of sustainability, which is the goal I suspect we would be looking for. I think that just to tag onto this point, we have seen how he's, you know, kind of given a kind of lukewarm response to members of his cabinet that haven't themselves responded appropriately to the lockdown. I mean, I'm obviously talking about the most important example here, the communications minister, Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams, and how because she, you know, did not comply with the lockdown, the people's view, you know, the public's eye was on President Ramaphosa to do something about that effectively and decisively. And a response to simply give 2 months special leave didn't, I suppose, meet with a lot of people's favor, because they expected him to fire her or to really show something that would indicate he is not happy with his own members of parliament who swear an oath to protect the country and to follow the rules. If they show they can't do that, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. But again, at the end of the day, he's one person. He has his own skills that he brings to the table. He's conveyed now that he can be a president in the best possible sense of the word. So he has to hold on to that now and make sure that he can do that again and again going forward in every different aspect, including, motivating and boosting the economy again, and dealing with social crises as a fallout of this disease, dealing with upset parliamentarians and political parties who aren't happy with him not having enough virtual meetings, parliament meetings. There's a lot of things that he'll have to deal with, but I'm hopeful that he'll be boosted and have the confidence to deal with any of those.
Okay, we'll allow 1 or 2 more questions because we have to round up in 5 minutes.
If there's no other questions, can I go again? It's Jean Gunling again.
You can go ahead.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Prof, I find the role of opposition parties in this crisis time very interesting. I almost feel that most of them don't have a role to play anymore because this new style almost took over their role. And I think many of them could function very well, or at least the 2 main opposition parties could function well in predecessor's time because there were so many issues.
Yes.
Now, and especially in this crisis time, there are no issues that they can criticize all the time. So do you want to share with us your view on the leadership on the opposition side and what will their role be after the crisis?
Okay, thanks, Jean. Again, really important discussion because we know in a democracy that opposition parties have a fundamental role to play, and we actually have one of the best and largest groups of opposition parties in our country, even though some are very small. But what it does is it helps add to the democratic nature, which is what you want. Ultimately, of a good quality democracy. You need all these different and varying voices. And it's true that in this scenario, the very next day after the president's first speech, you had this united front in opposition parties all rallying behind the president. And I think in that case, they were seeing President Ramaphosa as an individual, as the president of South Africa, and not as the president of the ANC, as an opposition party, necessarily to them. And that they gloried in that because they hadn't seen it before. So I think that was a wonderful thing for them. Of course, now they've had time to think about it a bit more, and the DA, as the main opposition party, has started to criticize more openly and publicly the president's stance, especially in terms of the extended lockdown. And ironically, what you see is the EFF and the Freedom Front Plus, 2 extremely opposing parties, having more of a common position on things, which is kind of ironic and kind of bringing them together, especially in relation to alcohol and those issues. So it's an amazing, I know the circumstances are dire, but for somebody interested in the subject, it's an amazing opportunity to study and observe what's going on around you and to see, because it's so unprecedented, what the responses are. And I'd be very interested to see what the result will be in terms of how the public has viewed opposition parties during this time. And if that's going to have any weighting when it comes to their membership or following later on.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Interesting.
Okay, Bulelwa is there. Bulelwa, you can go in.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Prof. I'm just listening to your conversation. It's very interesting. I still have questions about our president, the Honorable President Ramaphosa. Well, the way he has dealt with the other ministers with regards to their transgressions, doesn't that tell us as South Africans that he's still under a certain level of control, that this you can do, this you cannot do? This is a worldwide pandemic, so he doesn't have a choice. He has to do what is right, follow suit. But it also tells us that with the current situation, the way the ministers are acting, he still does not have an authority on them, because by now, we should have seen harsher penalties. We are not seeing anything as yet.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, is showing leadership, which we all appreciate as South Africans, and we're applauding that. But still, his cabinet, he cannot control it as yet. I'm still worried about that. Right now, he should have been given a right by his cabinet to deal with those that are not towing the line. He's still not able to do that. That's what I'm seeing. May I have your views, Prof?
Yes, thanks, B. You know what, actually, I completely agree with you. And the problem that I see here is that because there are so many different ministers, and you are, as a leader, you have to try and control different characters. I don't suspect President Ramaphosa would have thought for a minute that any of his ministers would have flouted the rules that he had laid down. I think he assumed everybody would be on board and do what they had to do and be role models. Of course, people are people, humans are humans, and even if you're a member of cabinet or not, you make mistakes. And so I suppose he's thought he's taken, like his normal self would, a measured, considered response to cases of flouting the rules from his ministers. And I think people would consider those to be, just not decisive enough, and we'd expect more because these are the people ultimately we're looking up to. And as I said at the very beginning, you have to model the behavior you expect from people. So you have to show people this is how you should behave and do the same and expect them to do the same, which is not the case. But I think that ultimately he is considering the fact that he needs a good team of people around him. And he also needs to show the public that he's making the right decision. So I think retrospectively, he might be upset with some of the choices he's made in telling off his cabinet members who have flouted the rules, or the decisions he's taken in regard to the communication minister's special leave. But I think that if more of this happens, he's definitely going to have to show more decisiveness in relation to coming down on them, because people are going to expect that more and more. And as people are stuck in lockdown more and more, they're going to have the opportunity to criticize more and more, especially if they stay healthy and interested in the news. So he's going to get public feedback en masse if he doesn't choose to be decisive in dealing with any ministers going forward.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
We have Stephen. Stephen, please go in.
Thanks, Theo. Prof, I just want to comment there as well. I think it's very easy to say that he's not decisive enough when dealing with these ministers, but one could also perhaps argue that he's buying political capital within the ANC itself, because we know that, or any political leader, in fact, in South Africa, their tenure is linked to their ability to balance various factions within their own political parties. So I wonder if his actions in this particular regard are not perhaps linked to his desire to try and buy a bit of capital when the crisis ends, so that he might have a bit more leverage to, flex his own leadership muscle and perhaps quell some of the, the factorial interests that are ongoing. And then secondly, just going back to your last comment that you made about people staying healthy and following the news, I wonder what impact this particular crisis would have on South Africa's political culture. We often talk about, PPS, spectators, subject and parochial political cultures. I just wonder how we would perhaps transition from a more spectator political culture to a more, active and participant political culture.
Thanks, Sven. I think both very valid, very interesting points. With regard to the second point about political culture, that's a very interesting thing, because we can't even lock down right now what South Africa's political culture is, if there is one, because there are so many different points of view about what that means and what it reflects in terms of characteristics of peoples and groups in society. But it's a very important point that you make, because people are actually watching the news more than they ever would. And it's an interesting thing, but I suspect ultimately that people are people, and if they're not interested in politics, they never will be interested in politics. What they might be interested in is whether or not they can protect their family and whether or not they have a livelihood at the end of the day, economically speaking. So protect their family's health and whether or not they have a livelihood at the end of the day. So very, very cool discussion. I like that you brought that up, political culture. It's an interesting one.
Okay, Bulela, I think we'll take the last one because Prof has to leave. She has time constraints. You can go ahead, Bulela.
I'd like to support the other speaker, Mr. Botha. Yes, it seems as though Ramaphosa is buying a political camaraderie. But then the question would be, should it be him alone who's doing the right thing? His cabinet has got a mandate to do the right thing. I don't think this is the time for him to be buying this friendship from his comrades. They should be rallying behind him and trying to minimize mistakes. That is my thinking. So I agree with Mr. Botha.
Just to respond to you, B, I also completely agree with that point. And the reason why is if you try and transport yourself now into being the president, how would you respond to this? And I know I'd want friends around me that would give me valid advice, that would, you know, assist me, that would help to support me, at least in public, and would not necessarily agree with me on everything, because that doesn't help you as a good leader. You need different perspectives to help motivate you and to see things from different points of view in order to make a valid decision about something. So I think that you're absolutely right. At this moment in time, he needs people around him who will rally, who will support him, who will follow the rules that he's laid down for everybody in the public to follow. And I'm not so sure if he's really concerned at the moment about using this for political gain later on, like Trump might be doing as the president of America, which I suspect he is doing. I think that Ramaphosa at the moment is really just focused sincerely on trying to get the country through this crisis. And I think that, because I said before, he's not a drama queen. He's never been a dramatist. He's not theatrical. You know, even his attempts behind the microphone to rally the people, you know, you can see the inflections in his voice. He's trying really hard to show that he's, you know, trying to motivate people in the language he's using. That's ultimately, he's a very intelligent man. He's an intellectual man, and he's also very savvy when it comes to what's required now and what will be required later on. So I think at the moment his focus very much remains on protecting South African citizens and doing the best he can as their president for them.
Thank you, Prof.
Prof Suzy, I think you can do a concluding remarks.
Thanks so much, Theo. I really appreciate all of you taking up your time and your data to come online to listen to me and my musings. But I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I hope that maybe in the future we can discuss something more. That would be fantastic. And I really hope that the president proves to be the kind of president we all want him to be, and we've seen a glimmer of it, and let's hope he continues in that fashion.